Heute gedenken wir gemeinsam mit unseren Freundinnen und Freunden und vielleicht auch Verwandten in Israel der Opfer der Shoah, des Holocaust, des Völkermordes an den europäischen Juden. Es ist der israelische Holocaust-Gedenktag am 27. Nissan des jüdischen Kalenders. Der internationale Gedenktag wird jährlich am 27. Januar begangen, dem Tag der Befreiung des Vernichtungslagers Auschwitz. Der israelische Gedenktag, der heutige Yom haSchoah, fand in Israel zunächst, als er in den 50er Jahren eingeführt wurde, relativ wenig Beachtung. Die streng religiösen trauen an anderen Tagen. Und auch für die israelische Gesellschaft lag damals der Fokus eher auf den Blick in die Zukunft, auf der Behauptung des eigenen Staates, auf die Schaffung einer gemeinsamen Identität, die eher auf jüdisches Heldentum bzw. jüdische Errungenschaften setzte und weniger Sinn für Juden als Opfer hatte. Davon zeugt schon die Bezeichnung des Gesetzes zur Einführung des Gedenktages, Gesetz zum Gedenktag an Shoah und Heldentum. Die Opfer des Holocaust und ihre Geschichten rückten erst nach und nach mehr ins Bewusstsein und in den Fokus der Erinnerungsarbeit und der Gedenkkultur. Auch anderswo und auch hierzulande war die Nachkriegszeit eher vom Schweigen über die Vergangenheit geprägt, wenn auch aus völlig anderen Gründen. Frau Lasker-Wallfisch beschreibt unter anderem etwa das Schweigen ihrer Mutter zu dem, was sie im Lager durchgemacht hat. So gab es auch das Schweigen der Opfer. Es gibt aber Taten, die können nicht weggeschwiegen werden. Und auch wenn es bei uns im Judentum strengstens untersagt wird, Tote auszugraben, zumindest im übertragenen Sinne, kann man hier nicht daran vorbei. Mord verjährt nicht, und die schmerzvolle Aufarbeitung dieses singulären Menschheitsverbrechens war für die Menschheit, Opfer wie Täter bzw. ihre Nachkommen unumgänglich. In der Sowjetunion war es in der Erinnerung der meisten der Mitglieder unserer Gemeinde, vor allem der Dichter und Schriftsteller Jewgeni Zuschenko, der zum ersten Mal das Schweigen über den Holocaust, dessen Opfer in der Sowjetunion und die Beteiligung sowjetischen Bürger in besetzten Gebieten an der durch die deutschen Besatzer organisierten Judenvernichtung brach. Mit den eindrücklichen Zahlen seines Gedichtes zu Babi Yar, der Schlucht vor Kiew, wo Zehntausende in kürzester Zeit zusammengetrieben und ermordet wurden und wo lange in der Nachkriegszeit nicht mal ein Denkmal aufgestellt wurde, die Schlucht liegt stumm. Darüber das Vergessen. Mein Haar ist bloß, ganz langsam wird es grau. Ich selbst bin jeder Schrei, der hier verhallte, der tonlos über 1000 Gräbern hing. Ich selbst bin jeder hier erschossene Alte. Ich selbst bin jedes hier erschossene Kind. Die nach dem Zusammenbruch der Sowjetunion in Babi Yar durch die Ukraine aufgebaute Gedenkstätte wurden nun durch die russischen Angriffe und Bomben teilweise zerstört. Holocaustüberlebende mussten erneut fliehen und sich in Kellern von den Bomben verstecken. Menschen, die den Holocaust überlebten, starben durch Putins Bomben. Das internationale Ausschusskomitee hat anlässlich des Holocaust-Gedenktages Yom haSchoah an diesem Donnerstag den russischen Präsidenten Wladimir Putin zu einem sofortigen Ende des Angriffskrieges in der Ukraine aufgefordert. Im Schatten und im Zorn über einen neuen entwässerten Krieg und der verbrecherischen Vernichtung von Menschenleben gedenken heute weltweit Überlebende des Holocaust ihrer Familien, die in deutschen Konzentrations- und Vernichtungslagern ermordet wurden, erklärte der Exekutivvizepräsident des Komitees, Christoph Hodner, am Donnerstag in Berlin. Ihre Gedanken und Gebete gehen heute auch zu den Überlebenden des Holocaust in der Ukraine, in Belarus und in Russland, die in die Finsternis dieses neuen Krieges geworfen sind, unter den Bomben leiden oder als Kronzeugen für den verbrecherischen Angriff missbraucht werden, sagte Holtner. Gerade an diesem Gedenktag forderten die Überlebenden des Holocaust sofortigen Frieden für die Ukraine. Bei der internationalen Gedenkveranstaltung in Kiew zum 80. Jahrestag des Massakers von Badilia sagte der Bundespräsident: denn wir müssen erinnern, um zu erkennen, wohin entfesselte Hass und Nationalismus, Antisemitismus und Rassenwahn führen können. Heute, nur wenige Monate später, sehen wir das in Putins Krieg in der Ukraine erneut. In Israel steht heute der Yom haSchoah nicht allein für sich, sondern auch in einem besonderen Kontext. Nur eine Woche darauf folgt der Yom haZikaron, der Gedenktag für die Gefallenen des Nahostkonfliktes. Seinerseits direkt gefolgt von Yom haAtzmaut, dem israelischen Unabhängigkeitstag. Auch letzteren werden wir kommende Woche in unserer Gemeinde begehen. Diese 3 Tage stehen in Israel und für Juden auf der ganzen Welt in einem Zusammenhang. In Israel sagt man, am Yom haAtzmaut feiern wir unseren Staat Israel. Davor, am Yom haZikaron, erinnern wir uns daran, was uns dieser Staat kostet. Und am Yom haShoah, was es uns kostet, Israel nicht zu haben. Leider war der Holocaust, die Shoah, weder der erste noch der letzte Völkermord in der Menschheitsgeschichte. Auch weder der erste noch der letzte Völkermord dieses quantitativen Ausmaßes. Und leider sehen wir auch heute erneut den Hass, die Entmenschlichung und all die anderen Geister, die dieses Menschheitsverbrechen heraufbeschworen haben. Dass jedoch das bürokratisch industrieorganisierte Morden und die Menschenvernichtung, zuletzt sogar über die eigene Selbsterhaltung stand, als selbst im Untergang sich das Regime weigerte, etwa für die Landesverteidigung oder gar die Rettung vom Leben, Kräfte von der Vernichtungsmaschinerie abzuziehen, macht dieses Verbrechen, macht den Holocaust historisch einmalig, historisch singulär. Bei der Erinnerung daran helfen uns heute zu nehmen gerade auch die Einzelschicksale, wie jene, um die es heute bei der Veranstaltung gehen soll, um auch über die in ihrem Ausmaß und ihrer Grausamkeit schier unvorstellbaren Zahlen und Fakten einen Zugang zum Unbegreiflichen zu finden. Es trotz all unserer natürlichen Abwehrmechanismen gegen die Auseinandersetzung mit solchen Schrecken an sich rankommen zu lassen. In Israel ertönten heute wie jedes Jahr für 2 Minuten die Sirenen. Der gesamte Verkehr wird unterbrochen und die Menschen stehen in schweigendem Gedenken. Es wurde auch mal diskutiert, die Tradition hierzulande zu übernehmen. Bisher ohne Ergebnis. Würde man ohne Unterbrechung für jedes Opfer der Shoah eine Gedenkschweigeminute einlegen, wäre es über 11 Jahre lang in diesem Land still. Als israelitische Gemeinde folgen wir heute der israelischen Tradition und ich bitte Sie daher alle aufzustehen und für 2 Minuten in schweigendem Gedenken zu verharren. Danke sehr.
Auf Deutsch: Gott lasse dich werden wie Sarah, Rivka, Rachel und Lea. Der Ewige segne und behüte dich. Der Ewige lasse dir sein Angesicht leuchten und sei dir gnädig. Der Ewige wende dir sein Angesicht zu und gebe dir Frieden. Shalom. Yesimcha Elohim Kesara Rivka Rachel Lea La 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 Yesimcha Elohim Kesara Rivka Rachel Lea was for you. For all your life. Your long life. Wer ist der Mensch, der Leben wünscht, der Tage liebt, um Gutes zu sehen? Bewahre deine Zunge von Bösen und deine Lippen von trügerischer Rede. Weiche von Bösen und tu Gutes. Suche Frieden und jage ihm nach. Jage ihm nach. Shalom, diese Shalom, diese Frieden. Only, we should have only peace in the world.
fades into the world of night, through shadows falling out of memory and time. Don't say we have come now to the end. White shows are calling. You and I will meet again, and you'll be here in my arms, just sleeping. What can you see on the horizon? Why do the white gods call across the sea? A painful horizon. The ships have come to carry you home, and all will turn to silver glass, and light on the water. Great ships pass into the west. Dankeschön. Die Einstellung anders, oder? Ein bisschen rein.
Spielst du einfach noch an oder später? Später, bitte.
Sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear you call my name. Even though I watch you come, I know I'll see you once again. The day will come when all my plans come true. So I won't light a candle yet for you. No, I won't light a candle yet for you. In my heart I still believe I'd kiss your face once more. Since the day you went away, I've kept your memory by my core, knowing that you'll soon come walking through. No, I won't light a candle yet for you. No, I won't light a candle yet for you. Every tear I will not cry,
Good evening from me also. I'm going to start and dive right into our conversation, basically. When Maya asked me last year to join me on her journey to Breslau, where she was visiting the places of where her family, her mother, her grandparents and her aunt had lived, she was doing research for a book, and when she asked me, I was incredibly honored. I was in the final stages of my dissertation. I'm writing about her mother's testimony and Holocaust education, and I had done a lot of workshops with her mother's testimony at schools, and they had most school children had been very impressed with her mother's testimony. And we had met only a year before, I have to say that.
Who?
The two of us.
A year before?
A year before you asked me to go on the journey with you.
Really?
Yes. So of course I immediately said yes, and what followed were two incredibly deep journeys, I would say, that have stayed with me since then. We first went to Breslau together in October, and only a month later we did a journey to Auschwitz for a documentary that Maya was doing at the time. And tonight, on this solemn day, we would like to share parts of our conversations during that time. We've had many, many conversations, many train journeys, actually. During those conversations, we've especially talked about, I don't even know where to begin, Holocaust memory, transgenerational trauma, different memory cultures between the UK and Germany, our personal interest in this topic, our personal relationship to the topic, but also national topics. So we would just like to share parts of these conversations with you tonight, and maybe we can start with talking about Breslau, where it started. So this is the picture that's up right now. We have the computer here, just so you know, because so we can see the pictures that we're actually talking about.
We're not seeing anything that you can't see. So, as Sana had said, we've made many journeys together, some literal, some metaphoric, but certainly in the passage of time, we've established a depth of connection that transcends culture, race, tradition, religion, and not that this is any great mitzvah, but you are my honorary Jewish best friend. And I feel on that, I must just say that I feel there are very few non-Jews that have the right to really engage or truly understand the very particular nuance of what we survivors and children of survivors are talking about. So Sana, I can honestly say, is one of two people that I've come across in my pretty big life who holds one of those positions, and I've dedicated my next book to her for that reason. Because it's no small thing, and I honour that. So tonight I'm here in honour of my mother, my family, all of those who can't be here, who can't speak. And I want us to join together in what I hope will be a mutually meaningful journey. And as Sana said, I will tell you a little bit about how we came on this journey together. So this map my mother gave me as we set out, because of course you will all know that Breslau is no longer in Germany, it's now Wrocław and is in Poland. That's not the Polish people's fault, it just is. It was my second trip there. My first had been 25 years earlier with my mother. So on our journey, which was several hours, but interestingly from Berlin, the journey is the same length of time as my mother used to make in 1936 and 37 and 38 before the night of Kristallnacht, which was when her studies were rudely interrupted. She commented, as only my mother would, "Oh, they haven't made the train journey any faster." So the train journey was 4, maybe 5 very rich hours. Different train, but same length. And arriving in Breslau station, next picture please.
I think we also have to think about the translation for a second.
I'm not yet, I'm going to just keep going.
Okay.
Arriving here, as you can see, on Breslau station, it's one of the few places that is still recognizable.
Can you see? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yes? Okay.
So the station is one of the few places that remains pretty much unchanged, apart from technology. And as we arrived at the station, I felt my mood change and a certain energy begin to fill me, which was one of sort of adrenaline and anxiety and deep, deep sadness, because, like for so many people, train stations contain their theatre of memory, and it was on, maybe not this platform, but on one of these platforms that my mother and Renata were arrested by the Gestapo. Is everybody following? Does anybody need any translation at this point?
Gut, ich fasse etwas zusammen von dem Text bis hierher. Maya erzählte, dass sie mit ihrer Freundin Sanna nach Breslau gefahren ist. Das war die Heimatstadt der Mutter, der Familie, eigentlich der Ursprung der Familie, damals in Deutschland, inzwischen gehört zu Polen. Sie kam am Breslauer Bahnhof an. Der Bahnhof ist bis auf die Technologie sehr unverändert. Das sieht fast aus wie damals in den 30er Jahren bis vor der Reichspogromnacht. Und Maya fühlte, als sie dort ankam, ganz starke Gefühle an dem Bahnhof, Angst, Trauer, Depression, weil sie wusste, an einer dieser Gleise, wenn auch nicht vielleicht dieselbe, wurde ihre Mutter Anita und ihre Tante Renate von der Gestapo verhaftet und deportiert.
So as we arrived there together, Sana and I think I became possessed, and Sana had to witness Maya in a very, what's the right word? What word would you like to use?
Traumatized.
Really traumatized, okay. But with intense purpose.
With intense purpose, yes, definitely.
I was sort of like a sniffer dog. I felt like a sniffer dog. I was there to sniff out and to witness again some things that I'd seen and some things that I could have imagined that I was going to see, and Sana was forced to see with me.
I think what was really touching, can you hear me? What was really touching to me was that you were actually physically engaging with the place so much. You were going towards walls and you were trying to touch and just sort of regain some moment of the place itself, the location. Can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, it was a strange combination of being a sniffer dog who's been there before, both literally and metaphorically. It's in my bones, but also in utter strangeness. So as you cross the road from the main station, you go to a street called Gartenstrasse. And it was on the corner of Gartenstrasse where my mother and Renata attempted to commit suicide. I've been in this spot before with my mother, and with my mother you don't have feelings, because feelings don't exist, or at least they're disassociated from, they're somewhere else. So this was the first time I'd been in that spot, in the very spot where it should have all come to an end. And some of you might know the miraculous story, some not. I'm not sure we have time today, but obviously the attempt to commit suicide, which was taking what they thought was cyanide, which had been swapped to almond paste by somebody who thought they might survive, and he was right. As the Gestapo were marching them towards the headquarters, together, 1, 2, 3, my mother was 15, Renata was 16. She remembers feeling very dizzy, but they kept walking. And my mother said she was relieved not to be dead. And then as you come to the end of that street, you arrive at, next picture please. That's the station.
Yeah, the station.
No, I don't think it's not that building.
Can you go 2 further? 2 weiter nochmal, Dankeschön.
Die 4. jetzt?
Also dieses Gebäude.
Ja.
Super.
Yes,
Translation.
Okay. Vom Bahnhof gingen Maja und Sana sehr in der Nähe zur Gartenstraße, eine Straße in Breslau. Und in der Gartenstraße, es war die Stelle, wo Anita, Majas Mutter, und Renate, Majas Tante, versucht haben, Selbstmord zu begehen, um der Deportation oder Verhaftung der Gestapo zu entkommen. Sie schluckten bereits Gift, aber Gestapo zwang sie weiter zu marschieren mit ihren Kommandos 1, 2, 3 und sie liefen weiter, obwohl sie schon schwindlig waren durch das Gift. Ja, und wurden gerettet von jemandem, der meinte, es ist doch besser, sie leben weiter.
And when we went there, while I was completely shocked by the building, do you remember that? I went...
Well, we haven't said what this building is yet.
I think you said it's... No. Oh, okay, then start talking about the building.
Well, Sana and I were walking down Gartenstrasse, and I was disorientated, of course, and Sana was studying the Stadtmap and the street correlates. And I knew what the prison looked like because I had been in the prison. But we fell upon a building which is the main police station now in Wrocław, which was the SS building. And something came over me. I was possessed. And I felt that I had to get inside this building.
And I kept saying, Maya, are you sure? Do you want to do this? Because for me, I really did not want to go in. Something was holding me back. I did not want to engage with this building. It was really hard for me, and you just went right up. And here we went.
So part one of this was, I went to the door where my mother and Renata would undoubtedly have gone through, because it's the door, a huge old metal door, which directly faces the prison. Very, very organised. And the Polish people that we came across spoke very little English and no German, so communication was a big problem. But somehow I managed to convey to this policeman that I had a great need to get inside this building. And he somehow understood. So I got into the first part of the building, which was unchanged, completely unchanged. And then we walked around to the front of the building, which you can see, which is one of the most darkly foreboding places that I can imagine. I mean, it's just black. You can't see it so much in this image. And here something else took over, that Sana, I knew Sana had moments of thinking, I don't think I want to be with Maya right now. I really don't think I want to be with her. And I was possessed. And I marched up those steps into that building, up to some very primitive reception desk, to a poor woman who spoke not a word, and she started to talk to me on Google Translate. Now, I had conveyed in my energy that I was there for something important. So the next thing that happened, Sana was still outside. She had not dared to come in yet. And I was like, Sana, come in. So finally she came in, like watching, I think you were watching this drama unfolding. What were you saying, what it was like for you?
Well, like I said before, it was really hard. Again, Nazi architecture in general, for me, it triggers something in me. I've been living in the UK for a very long time also, and every time I come back to Berlin, it's for some reason triggering. I guess because I've been dealing with these stories for such a long time without wanting to misappropriate them. But going into that building was, for me, I thought we were going to visit the places where your family had lived. And engaging with that part of the story, for some reason, I was drawn back for a moment. But what I thought was most important is what you said to them then.
So, the next thing that happened was 2 or 3 officials came from different parts of this building, and again, very, very little common language, German or English, but enough was understood. Well, first they said, are you here to report a crime? And I said, yes, but not one that you have committed. And then they understood that this was something to do with my family story, and that I just needed to be in this place. And as I came to try to make sense of what I was doing, in some way, and it was of course a completely fantastical idea, but what was driving me was this energy that I was trying to reverse something. I chose to go in, and I could leave, and nobody was going to stop me, and that was a kind of defining moment, a really defining moment in many, many ways, which perhaps I'll say more about later.
Ist das an?
Nee.
Ja.
Jetzt?
Jetzt?
Ein bisschen näher zu.
Okay. Jetzt?
Ja, jetzt.
Also Maya erzählte, sie kam in Breslau an ein großes, schwarzes Gebäude, dunkles Gebäude, mächtiges. Es ist jetzt das Polizeihauptquartier und es war aber damals das SS-Hauptquartier, die SS-Hauptstelle. Und Maya spürte einen Zwang, ein Drängen, in dieses Gebäude einzutreten, ins Innere reinzuschauen. Sana fühlte sich abgestoßen, wollte überhaupt nicht rein, aber Maya war fast besessen davon einzutreten und ist auch eingetreten, hat es geschafft. Sana kam auch mit und 2 bis 3 uniformierte Menschen, Polizisten kamen ihr entgegen. Die Verständigung war eher schwierig, weil Menschen in Polen kaum Englisch sprechen, Maya kein Polnisch spricht, aber irgendwie ging die Verständigung doch. Und sie wurde gefragt, sind Sie hier, um ein Verbrechen anzuzeigen? Und Maya sagte ja, aber nicht von jetzt und nicht nur von Ihnen hier begangen. Und als Maya eingetreten ist, fühlte sie diesen ganz großen Unterschied zu damals, weil sie sagt, ich habe die Wahl, hier einzutreten. Ich habe auch die Wahl, wieder rauszugehen. Im großen Unterschied zu ihrer Mutter und Tante, die nicht diese Wahl hatten.
And if we could go back to picture 3. 4, sorry, which is the prison where your mother and Renate were before they were deported to Auschwitz. And they could see in their book, it's very clear, they could see a clock tower while they were in there counting the hours. So we could see wherever we went, from the taxis, we could see the clock tower as well during that journey. And it was directly opposite of the SS building. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that experience of seeing that everywhere.
Well, when I had been to Breslau the first time with my mother, I actually was inside the prison and inside her actual cell, which she remembered specifically because of the clock, where the clock was positioned. And the clock, can you imagine, 1 year, 13 months I think my mother was in prison. Renata was there for about 11 months before she was deported, my mother a little longer. That clock was everything. And can you imagine watching a clock for that period of time when you're in those conditions? And my mother, when I went into that cell with her, she said it was pure luxury, because now, or then, 25 years ago, it was only one guy with a TV and a toilet. She was in there with 6 or 8 other prisoners and a pot for their shit. And that was it. So for her, this was luxury. So it's pretty weird when you go into these places and try to imagine, you know, that you're mutti. This is where you come from. And to also have a mother who is so remarkable, but is so impenetrable. So my first journey was very, very different to the ones that I've made. And I've made the same journeys with Sana, this 25 years on, which have been very, very different, very different. So for me, being at the prison again, what was really powerful was its proximity to the SS building. So you kind of, to walk to the spot where my mother and aunt were arrested, to the spot where they tried to commit suicide, to the road they walked down, to the Gestapo building where they were processed across the road to prison. Straight line. Very, very neat and tidy.
Maya erzählt, als sie das erste Mal in Breslau war, war es zusammen mit ihrer Mutter Anita. Und sie waren in dem Gefängnis, in dem Anita und die Tante Renate ungefähr 14 Monate inhaftiert waren. Man sah von dem Gefängnis aus einen Uhrturm und diese Uhr bestimmte für 14 Monate das Leben von Anita und Renate. Und Maya sagt, es war sehr bewegend und sehr eindrücklich, jetzt dieses Gefängnis auch nochmal zu sehen, aber es hatte nicht diese Power, nicht diese Emotionalität, wie das SS-Gebäude zu sehen.
And that night we went to the synagogue. Maybe we can have the picture of the synagogue. Should be 5, 6. Yes, it's right there. It was right there. Yes. And it was the synagogue where your mother went and your family went as children.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. That's what you told me.
Okay. Did I tell you that?
You did.
Okay, well, I'm not sure. My mother, they weren't great synagogue goers, but it's quite possible. But the point is, it's the last, I think it's the last remaining original synagogue, and it's been restored. That is the point, and it's very beautiful. And has anybody here been to Wrocław? Okay. Okay. Yeah. So it's when I was there 25 years ago, it hadn't been restored. Now it's become just lovely, just beautiful, sort of magical. And here we spent an evening. It was a bit like going, well, not a bit, it was like going from the dark to the light. So we started in the places of despair, and then we visited places which were really where I could imagine what my family's life might have been like or was like, where they would have walked, where they might have had cafe and kuchen. And then we searched for houses.
Maja und Sana besuchten auch die Synagoge in Breslau, und es war die Synagoge, in die ihre Mutter und die Familie als Kinder, als junge Menschen reingegangen sind. Es ist ein wunderschöner Ort, auch jetzt noch. Breslau ist sehr schön, sie haben lange Zeit dort verbracht und sind aber auch dann weitergegangen zu den Plätzen, wo eigentlich das alltägliche Leben der Familie stattfand. Kaffee und Kuchen trinken zum Beispiel.
Yes, and one of the things that was remarkable is how few was left of the places that actually shaped everyday life. So we had this old map that we had shown earlier, and we needed to find on Google Maps and through a historian that we found online what the streets would be called like today. So it was always translating basically from 1932 to the present, and then arriving and never knowing what we were going to find. And a couple of times we arrived and there was nothing, literally nothing left. And maybe you can describe that.
As Sana said, I was searching in every possible way one can search. And I was searching for a life that had been stolen. I was searching for a life that I had imagined. I found myself searching for my grandparents, for signs, for signs, for symbols, for atmosphere. And mainly we found empty spaces. And when we arrived at the place where the family last lived, on a street called, what was the street called? Kaiser Wilhelmstraße. There was just a wasteland, and I was filled with despair because I couldn't orientate myself in this wasteland. And I was trying to organise myself, and we called my mother, who was really angry. I'm 97 years old, you can't expect me to remember. And I said, Mum, do you remember the blind school? There's a blind school that would definitely have been there because it's a really old building. Leave me alone. She doesn't want to go back anymore. She's done her work. So I found a tree. I found a tree in the place that was close enough to where my beloved Laskers from Breslau would have been together. And I found a tree that was definitely more than 100 years old. And that became my home. And Sana left me with my tree. And I'm not one of these tree freaks. I'm one of the most grounded, unspiritual people you'll meet. But I believe in symbols and things that give me a certain energy. So the tree and I became the Laskers from Breslau.
Maja suchte in Breslau nach dem Leben, was damals eigentlich gestohlen wurde, ein Leben, was sie sich vorgestellt hat. Und an häufigen Stellen, wo sie sich eigentlich erinnern wollte, die Plätze stehen nicht mehr, es sind leere Plätze. Und ganz besonders am letzten Wohnort, wo Anita und ihre Familie gelebt haben, in der Kaiser-Wilhelm-Straße, die gab es nicht mehr. Das war leer, das war umgebaut. Und Maja rief dann ihre Mutter an, Anita in England, um Erinnerungen aufzuwecken oder die Mutter zu beten, eben das zu beschreiben, wie es damals aussah. Und die Mutter sagte, ich bin 97 Jahre alt, lass mich in Ruhe. Also sie hatte praktisch abgeschlossen mit der Erinnerung. Maja fand einen Baum genau in der Ecke, 100 Jahre alt. Und das wurde für sie das Symbol oder die verlorene Heimat, die Verbindung dann zur Erinnerung.
And I was wondering if you could maybe say a little bit more about your desire to leave something in those places.
And of course we, as Jews, we don't usually leave flowers. But one of the things we came across in a beautiful part of Breslau, picture of the square.
Fear, was the sign?
Is that the square?
Yeah, that's the one. That was the one.
Yeah.
The one before. Yes, thank you.
As you can see, beautiful old architecture. We came across one of my great loves is flowers, don't we all? A flower market, and in this flower market, I think I took four small flower bunches of flowers. And I had a strong need to leave something. Oh, and of course, I know flowers don't last forever, but I had to do something physical. And there is something very powerful about the physicality of experience. You know, it is a completely embodied experience. So when I say I was possessed, I think I was possessed by my grandparents, by just an enormous energy. And I wasn't sure where these flowers were going to go, what places would feel right. But I left one set with the tree, and I left one set at the Gestapo building, because it isn't the Gestapo building anymore, and they didn't do it. And then it was 3. Yeah, it was 3.
No, it was 4. It was as much as we could carry.
So I know where the last one went. Where did the...
I don't remember.
Okay.
We left it.
I left the last ones on the station platform.
Yes, you left 2.
I left 2.
Yes, exactly.
I left 2 on the station platform, yeah. And I mean, it's not such a big deal, but I think the significant thing was, what do you do? And it's a question for everybody as much as it is for myself. What do we do with the enormity of our history? What do we do with the enormity of our legacy? And what actually is the meaning of human experience? And how do we really engage with that in a meaningful way? And that is my sort of mission. So I was doing something that was much bigger than me, way beyond me. But somehow I was a vehicle, and that's how I see myself, as a vehicle, because I have a certain capacity to think about and make sense of, as well as be traumatized by my history and my engagement with it. Because it isn't enough just to go and look. You have to, I believe one has to really engage with it, And that means feeling all sorts of very difficult things.
Maya kaufte auf dem Blumenmarkt 4 Blumensträuße, wusste eigentlich noch gar nicht, wohin damit, was sie macht, aber sie hatte den dringenden Wunsch, etwas dort zu hinterlassen. Und so hat sie diese 4 Blumensträuße an speziellen Stellen verteilt. Eines war an dem Baum, von dem sie eben erzählte, eins an dem früheren Gestapo-Hauptquartier, jetzt das Polizeigebäude, und 2 auf dem Bahnhof auf 2 verschiedenen Gleisen. Es ist ihr Umgang, mit der Geschichte umzugehen, auch die Verbindung, diese Leidenschaft, Mitleidenschaft mit der Geschichte ihrer Familie, mit der Traumatisierung, die über die Generationen fortgeführt wird. Und es reicht nicht nur, an die Orte hinzufahren, um sie anzuschauen, sondern wirklich, um sich mit ihnen zu verbinden.
And I think I should just give you some context, because I think that bit was missing. I think Sana mentioned it at the beginning about research. Some of you might know or not know, but I emigrated to Germany 2 years ago. 2 years ago, is it?
2 years, yeah.
Yeah, 2 years. I'm the first returner. It's quite a big deal. And this part of this trip, my new book is coming out, everybody, in 3 months, and it is about, it's the second part, and it encompasses some of what you're hearing about today. I would have been sued if I had brought you a chapter from the book. I wanted to, but I would have been sued, so I didn't. You might like to translate that. Give them a laugh.
Gut, Maya lebt seit 2 Jahren wieder in Deutschland. Sie ist zurückgekehrt an die Wurzeln, die erste aus der Familie. Die Erlebnisse und Eindrücke hat sie auch in ihrem Buch, was hier vorne ausliegt und erworben werden kann, ausgedrückt. Das Buch wurde innerhalb von 3 Monaten geschrieben. Die ganzen Erlebnisse sind drin. Sie ist am 2. Teil, ja.
And I've got enough trouble with them as it is. So this last year of my life has been very much concentrated on writing this book. And in writing this book, I have wanted to visit in new ways, places, and have experiences that have never actually been had before. And we'll go on to that now. But here we have, I think, the picture, the last picture.
The picture at the platform, which should be 6.
Where I am leaving.
Yes, it's the right one, yes.
And I didn't know where to leave the flowers, so I left them on top of the destination board. And I always find names of towns in Germany and Poland very evocative. So that's where they were.
I'd just like to add one more question to that, because you traveled to Breslau before with your mother, so this was the 2nd time. But this time you were returning to Germany. Was that a different feeling for you? What was that like?
I was in my own body.
Why?
Because I wasn't in my mother's body. You know, it takes quite a long time to individuate, I think even longer when you come from backgrounds like mine and perhaps many of you here, I don't know. And attachment relationships are complex, and mine with my mother is particularly so. So there are now, quite officially, 2 Frau Lasker-Wallfisches. And my mother told me the other day, she said, "But you use my name, Maya." And I said, "But Mum, it's what is on my birth certificate. I am Marianne Lasker-Wallfisch." But I've had so many married names, I'm afraid, that it's new. So in Germany, my German passport, my Meldung, Marianne Lasker-Wallfisch. So my mother, it's a very complex thing. My mother is having to sort of, although on a conscious level, she's very proud to hand the reins to me, as she says, but it's weird as well. So now, as I walk these streets and as I visit these places, I am Marianne Lasker-Wallfisch. I am not just the daughter of the cellist from Auschwitz, which is how I used to introduce myself.
Sanna fragte, wie es war, bei der 2. Reise von Breslau nicht nach England zurückzukehren, sondern nach Deutschland, weil sie ja dort wohnte. Und wo dann der Unterschied ist, auch vom Gefühl her, ob es einen Unterschied gab. Und sie sagte, ja, ganz klar, sie hat ihre eigene Identität gefunden. Sie ist Marianne oder Maya Lasker-Wallfisch und sie ist nicht mehr nur die Tochter einer Holocaustüberlebenden, wie sie sich lange selbst identifiziert hat. Ihre Mutter hat sie mal angesprochen, ja, du trägst ja denselben Namen, Lasker-Wallfisch, und sie sagt, ja, das ist ja auch der Name, der in meiner Geburtsurkunde steht, und genau das bin ich.
I hope that you guys will forgive, but I feel that this is terribly important. I feel the need to continue rather than there be a break for music now, because it doesn't feel right to me. So I can't go back in and out, because this is a very organic and deep thing for me. So is it okay with you if I go on to the next part of what I would like to tell you guys about? Yeah? Okay.
Sie fragt, ob es in Ordnung ist, wenn wir jetzt ohne Unterbrechung von der Musik weitermachen, Denn sie hat das Gefühl, sie kann nicht emotional jetzt rausgehen, die Pause machen und dann beim nächsten Teil weitermachen, ob es für alle in Ordnung ist.
If you guys want to hear music at the end, you can. It's not. It's yeah.
Zum Schluss.
Dann, ja, genau. Und die Musik kommt dann zum Schluss.
So.
And then, so what happened with the book also was that Maya was asked to do a documentary, which leads on to the next journey that we did together. But maybe you want to explain first how this whole documentary came about.
Now, what I'm going to tell you now is not known in the wider world. Okay, so some of you may be shocked. Some of you may think it's terrible. Some of you may think, I don't know what you'll think. But I was approached to make a film about my life and my journey to coming back to Germany and about trauma. That's where the sort of idea for the film began. And we began filming. And as the story unfolded, and I began to talk about my engagement and involvement with the children of perpetrators and their trauma, and how much work my mother has done in that field, and how essential it is, and how horrific what they have to manage is, our ideas for that project, our film, grew beyond what I could ever have imagined. So, it's even difficult. Even when I say it myself, I can't quite believe it. But I was the first person to witness, to take. I don't even know how to put it into words. Can you show the picture, and I'll speak to the picture of the meeting?
7. Yes.
Now, you'll obviously recognise me, but let me tell you who these other people are. The elderly man is the son of the commandant of Auschwitz. Yes. The younger man, my contemporary, is his grandson. So here is the son of the biggest mass murderer in the world, his grandson and me meeting in Auschwitz in the last remaining synagogue. And he had lived there for the first 8 years of his life in Auschwitz, in the villa, which many of you will know still stands. Neither of them had ever been back. So my preparation for this was enormous. I was with the film crew. I was with Sana and another associate of mine. And I had some very key boundaries. And the picture you see here is literally the first time we met. Literally the first time we met. And despite my preparation, I didn't know how I would feel, what I would do, what I would say, how it would be. And it's an experience that's changed me forever. I think it changed everybody that bore witness to it as well.
Absolutely.
Maya plante einen Film plant einen Film zu drehen über ihr Leben, über die Biografie, auch das Leben, zu leben mit dem Trauma, was sie erlebt hat, mit ihrem Hintergrund. Und dafür fuhr sie nach Auschwitz zur Vorbereitung. Und es gab dort ein Treffen, was man auf dem Bild hier sieht. Der ältere Mann, den man hier sieht auf dem Bild, ist der Sohn eines großen Kommandeurs aus Auschwitz, also der Sohn eines der größten Massenmörder, der überhaupt gelebt hat. Und der weitere Mann ist ein Enkel von diesem Kommandeur aus Auschwitz. Und Maya erzählte, es war das erste Treffen überhaupt und trotz aller Vorbereitung, sie wusste nicht, wie sie emotional reagieren würde auf dieses Zusammentreffen, was dort stattfand.
So as they sat with me and I sat with them.
Can we go to two more pictures? One more? Can you go one more picture?
As I sat with these men and they sat with me, I felt nothing but pity. And the old man, who's 86 now, looked at me and I looked into his eyes and he begged for my forgiveness. And it is not for me to forgive him or his son. I do not envy them. And they showed immense courage. The security, as you might imagine, in Birkenau was very tight because of these unusual visitors. Nobody knew, apart from security, who they were, which was a very bizarre sensation.
I think, to me, it was very difficult in the beginning when I heard about this, because I wasn't sure how I felt. I did not want to meet them personally. And I thought, Maya, are you crazy? Why would you want to do this? But for Maya, it was essential also for your book, I think, to work through the process, for the documentary to go. And she asked me to go with her and another friend. And we both witnessed while everyone was coming in. And the moment coming in from different angles also. How do you even say hello to each other in those beginnings? What do you say? And so there was silence, and then I think you opened up. And then you could tell the weight in the room. And we weren't even sitting, they were sitting upstairs, we were sitting downstairs, and it was just palpable in the room. Maybe you can say a little bit more about that night and the first encounter.
Well, I mean, it took again, I was not on my own. I knew that what I was doing was far, far bigger than me, and it required a dignity and a stillness and an attention that was probably one of the most defined experience. Well, nobody's had that experience before. But I felt, and I thank God for that, I felt such compassion for these men because, as I said to them, they come from the worst and I come from the finest. And I felt his suffering. And you can't compare, let's not even go there. But he was a child, and that was his father. And what's so desperately sad was this old man who's lived in the shadow of the horror, and they haven't changed their name, has happy memories of the place of hell. And he had to face, as an old man, what his father had done. And he faced it with me. There was no avoidance. So it was a mitzvah. It was a mitzvah. And I changed him, and he changed me. And if this isn't possible, I'm wasting my time anyway.
Bei diesem Zusammentreffen von Maya und den Nachfahren von diesem Kommandeur, diesem Massenmörder aus Auschwitz, Maya fühlte eigentlich nichts als Mitleid mit diesem Mann, mit diesem alten Mann, mit dem älteren Mann, dem Sohn von dem Kommandeur. Er bat sie um Vergebung, aber Maya sagt, ich bin nicht an der Stelle, um zu vergeben, ich kann nicht. Aber sie bedauerte ihn. Er musste sich auseinandersetzen als alten Mann mit den Taten von seinem Vater. Nicht er hat die Taten begangen, sondern der Vater. Und dieses Treffen hat beide verändert. Sowohl Maya hat es verändert, wie auch den Sohn des Kommandeurs. Das ist wohl die Mission von diesem Treffen gewesen.
So, I feel activism is really important, I want to do things. It's very important to me to do. And here I was doing and being and discovering aspects of myself. So I'm going to say something now that will sound very strange to many of you. I hope some of you, it won't sound so strange. I know you get it. One thing I just want to say, I had boundaries. I would not stay in the same hotel and I would not eat together. And this wasn't aggressive at all. It was just my own boundary. That some things I just had to I'm doing this, but I'm not doing that. And that was important. But I stood in the music block where my mother was for 2 years. And I stood there by myself and I thought, I might have said, so this is who you are, my Lasker-Wallfisch. So I found something. I found something of myself that I could really own. And this was defining again, because when you come from a background like mine, you have borrowed memories, you have not the right to the suffering, you have so many things. But here I was, Maya Lasker-Wallfisch, doing something that I knew was entirely, it was just right. I just felt it was right, and I knew that all the people that mattered to me and that knew it was right too. And it was quite a beautiful moment in its own weird way. And I spoke to my mother, I called my mother on whatever device I was on, and we spoke about it. But you'll all maybe be wondering, so what did my mother think about all this? Well, I returned to London with the Hesses. And the Hesses came to my mother's house. But when I arrived, the day before, my mother's words to me, which were the nicest words, or the most beautiful words my mother has ever said to me, when she opened the door, "Welcome home, hero. Tell me all about it." I had waited my whole life for my mother to see me in my own capacity to make a difference. And she really did. And she was so proud of me. So I know I did the right thing. And the next day the Hesses came. And my mother, who probably you've all encountered in one way or another, scary, she wasn't. She wasn't. And you'll all one day, if you're interested, see this film and you'll see it for yourselves. I hope the people that left don't feel repelled that I'm telling this story, because I believe in the world we live in today, if we don't begin to build bridges, if we don't begin to talk to each other, if we don't begin to actually understand and make meaning and discover tolerance, we might as well all forget it. And we're in enough trouble again, as we know. So it's in that spirit that I do this work, that I did this work, and I feel that I have the right to do it. And I hope that most of you here, I really do hope that most of you here can understand that.
And if I can just add one last sentence, I'm sorry, about that, of the people that were there to witness that. I think one of the things that stayed with me was the negotiation of boundaries, as you said before. Every one of us was negotiating their own boundaries with this topic. And I think that's something that I've definitely taken away from that experience as well. That, you know, there's nothing, you can't tell anyone else how to engage with this. But this is one way to engage with it, and I think it was a very successful one in that sense, and a very moving one for all of us.
Oh, yes.
And we all went away with, I think, new boundaries, in a sense, and new openness. So I think both of it was gained in that.
And I remember you and, I can't think of her name. Who was with us? Judy. Said to each other, I don't know how Maya manages, because you were watching me. I mean, I'm part of my professional life is negotiating boundaries, but I just know, I know when it's time to go. That it's a helpful thing. But can we go to the picture in the and here last picture
one, please.
Here. I don't know if you guys know, you might do, but in the last few years, the Auschwitz Memorial Site have put together it's 2 huge rooms, a book of names. And here I have my hands on my grandparents' names, Alphonse and Edith Lasker. And these were entirely private, a film crew, but I didn't go into the villa, the Hesses didn't come, we negotiated boundaries. And I have no regrets. I wish we could just show the one of Mum. We don't have it on there. No. I was going to show you a picture of my mother with them, but I felt I didn't. Because I didn't ask my mother's permission, so I didn't. But it is possible to break bread and more.
Maya berichtet, bei dem Treffen, sie zog Grenzen, sie konnte nicht alles mit dieser Familie, mit den Nachkommen machen. Sie wohnten nicht im selben Hotel und das ging einfach nicht. Sie stand aber später in dem Musikblock in Auschwitz, genau an der Stelle, wo ihre Mutter damals als Cellistin gespielt hat im Mädchenorchester, dadurch hat sie ja überlebt. Und in dem Moment fühlte sich die Mission und die Taten einfach richtig an. Sie war sicher, sie tut hier das Richtige. Und rief auch ihre Mutter an und hat über das Erlebnis berichtet, kam dann kurze Zeit später wieder zurück nach England zu der Mutter und die Mutter empfing sie mit den Worten, willkommen zu Hause, du Heldin, und gab ihr das Gefühl, das absolut Richtige zu tun, eigentlich die Worte, auf die Maya ihr gesamtes Leben gewartet hat, denn als Tochter, als Nachkommen von einer Holocaustüberlebenden ist es sehr schwierig, die richtigen Taten, die richtigen Worte zu finden. Und in dem Moment wusste Maya, ja, diese Mission ist absolut richtig und ich bin hier auf dem richtigen Weg. Und was Sanna dann noch hinzugefügt hat, bei dieser Reise hat jeder für sich durch diese Begegnung die eigenen Grenzen neu gezogen in Begegnungen, aber auch neue Offenheiten dadurch für sich selbst gefunden. Und es ist wichtig, mit dieser neuen Offenheit weiterzugehen, Brücken zu bauen. Und sie hofft, dass alle irgendwann von uns diesen Film sehen werden, den Maya gerade dabei ist zu drehen, auch um die Brücken zu bauen zwischen den Generationen, zwischen auch Tätern und Überlebenden und Nachfahren davon.
Maya just also asked me what you feel about this, or if you would like to ask a question about this experience, because this feels very, we don't really know what you think about this. So if you want to ask, feel free to.
Möchte einer von Ihnen eine Frage stellen? Wie geht es Ihnen dabei, wenn Sie diese Erlebnisse hören? Möchten Sie was fragen?
I understand clearly that you said you're not in a position to say, to forgive. On the other hand side, is there guilt on the other side because they were children Why did he ask for forgiveness? Because it wasn't his personal fault.
Absolutely. I think it's shame. It's actually shame. It's almost worse than guilt. It's a terrible shame.
You actually said that to them. He asked you, and you said to them, there's no guilt. I think that's what you said.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Die Frage wurde gestellt, Maya sagte, sie ist nicht in der Position, bei der Möglichkeit zu vergeben, aber der Sohn trägt ja eigentlich keine Schuld, aber er fühlte sich schuldig. Wo ist die Schuld? Und Maya sagte, es ist mehr das Schämen, die Schande darüber als Nachkommen. Es ist keine Schuld, es ist die Schande da. Und der Sohn hat keine Schuld an den Taten.
Be brave.
Meine Frage ist zum Schreiben der Opfer. Ja, es wahrscheinlich sind viele Bücher darüber geschrieben, aber persönlich zu dir, Maya, meine Frage, weißt du, ja, aus deinem Gefühl her, warum schrieb deine Mutter über das, was sie erlebt hat in Auschwitz?
She's asking why your mother was silent about her experiences in Auschwitz for a long time.
Well, nobody asked her anything for a very long time. That's one factor. When my mother arrived in England, both she and her sister were desperate to talk, but nobody asked any questions for fear that they might upset them. Well, you have to do a hell of a lot. And so they settled into a silence. And as silence became the landscape of normality. And it was, it was that, and it was also then, when she had children, a desire to protect her children. She did not want to know or to tell her children when if we asked, why do we have no grandparents, that they were shot, dug and were shot into their own graves. She didn't want to traumatize us beyond all capacity to survive. Of course, as parents, we think we're doing the right thing. I don't know what's right, wrong, but that was why my mother didn't speak. An absence of courage, of people asking questions, which is why I think, guys, ask questions, it's really important. And it's always better to ask than not. What's the worst that can happen? So my mother stayed silent till people began to show an interest. And then Holocaust fever happened, let's face it. And then it was never I'm now going to do this. It was a series of things that happened, and she found that this was now something that was clearly needed, and embraced it. And it was her way that she reconciled and made peace with Germany. When she did not set foot in Germany until she was maybe 60, 65. That's why I don't speak German. It was forbidden. But they spoke German, my parents, but that's how powerful the communication was. She's furious with me now, but it's so powerful that I find German very difficult to learn. So that's why my mother stayed silent. And now she doesn't want to talk about it anymore because she's very depressed by what's going on in the world. Not surprisingly.
You talked about...
Ich übersetze erst. Ihre Mutter, Mayas Mutter Anita, wollte anfangs in England eigentlich über ihre Erlebnisse erzählen, aber es fragte keiner und sie hat das Gefühl, keiner wollte es wissen. Und so begann sie zu schreiben über diese Erlebnisse. Später, als sie Kinder hatte, wollte sie auch die Kinder davor beschützen. Die Kinder nicht traumatisieren, den Kindern nicht erzählen, dass die Großeltern an ihrem eigenen Grab, vorm offenen Grab erschossen wurden und die ganzen traumatischen Erlebnisse. Und aus dem Grund schwieg Anita über die Erlebnisse im Holocaust. Erst viel später, als Menschen sich überhaupt trauten zu fragen, ganz langsam konnte sie sich öffnen und darüber erzählen und hat festgestellt, ja, es ist der richtige Weg. Das war auch der Zeitpunkt, wo sie dann im Alter von über 60 das erste Mal wieder nach Deutschland gefahren ist, aufgrund dieser Erlebnisse. Inzwischen schweigt sie wieder zu dem Thema, einfach sie möchte nicht mehr erzählen. Sie ist 97, aber auch aufgrund der Ereignisse in der Welt jetzt möchte sie nicht mehr über ihre Erlebnisse sprechen.
You talked about your search for identity as a generation or a person. Would you say that it's common to your mates, other Holocaust, children of Holocaust survivors, that they need to find their own identity?
I don't think it's uncommon. It's not uncommon. I mean, obviously.
Because the media were talking about this day, for example, or the things that passed, could define you just as children of the Holocaust survivors.
Absolutely.
But we have the problem of actual anti-Semitism, and so you need to be a voice in these days.
Exactly. Thank you. That's very well put. And that is what I hope I am.
Okay.
A little bit, my own tiny little bit. That's what I absolutely. I mean, I used to be the daughter of the Czechs from Auschwitz, and I literally was in conferences 7 years ago. I was still saying that. And I actually individuated and defined myself in Germany. It actually happened in the Bundestag. I was in the Bundestag and I had a series of epiphanies, honestly. And it became very clear to me what I needed to do and I had to do, and I've done it. So it's way beyond. I am absolutely my mom's daughter, but I am Maya Lasker-Wallfisch.
Es wurde gefragt, weil Maya vorhin sagte, sie musste erst ihre eigene Identität finden, ob es normal ist für die zweite Generation, für die Generation von Holocaust-Überlebenden, sich selbst zu finden und sich nicht nur zu definieren als Tochter oder Sohn vom Holocaust-Überlebenden. Maya antwortete ja, es ist nicht ungewöhnlich für diese Generation, es ist ein sehr wichtiger Prozess, aber auch nur dadurch kann man die Botschaft weitergeben. Sie ist sie selber, sie ist nicht die Tochter von der Cellistin und Holocaust-Überlebenden, sondern sie ist Maya Lasker-Wallfisch und dadurch kann sie die Botschaft auch gut weitergeben.
It was a really big thrill for me when I got in my Altbach in Berlin, when I got my name signed. I cannot tell you, it was like putting a mezuzah up. It really was, I couldn't believe it. It exists, Maya Lasker-Wallfisch has a name now in Berlin.
Es war ein sehr eindrückliches Erlebnis, als ihr Namensschild in Berlin am Altbau in ihrer jetzigen Wohnung angebracht wurde und sie sagte, ja, das bin ich und ich wohne hier, es ist mein Schild. Es war fast vergleichbar mit dem Anbringen einer Mezuzah an die Türrahmen. So eindrücklich und so bedeutungsvoll.
Did I get that right that this...
Can you stand up so I can hear you better? I can't hear you.
Did I get this right that this son of the commander was very first time in Auschwitz with you together? He's never been there before, right?
Correct.
So,
You got it right.
Also ich habe gefragt, ob ich das richtig verstanden habe, dass der Sohn von diesem Auschwitz-Commander mit ihr das erste Mal in Auschwitz war, um sich das anzuschauen. So, can you maybe share a little more about his reaction, like when you were with him right there?
He was broken. In that moment when I sat with them, because no one, it was very organic, because, you know, and I, as I said, I was prepared, but I wasn't prepared. So I sat alone at this table, and they were finally brought upstairs to meet me. And they sat down, and I realised he was just looking, he couldn't look me in the eye. So I sort of searched him out, and I knew, and I'm not somebody who gazes deeply into people's eyes, that's not my natural way, but I knew that this was beyond language, it was so primitive. His agony was primitive. The energy that I felt was so powerful. So I knew we needed to look each other in the eye, in a really searching way. And I searched him out, and we found each other, and what I saw was a broken man, so full of, I mean, he hadn't even been in Auschwitz yet. This was in a synagogue, in a building attached to a synagogue. And he was, it embarrasses me a little bit because he was, it so was not about me. I was, and this is very important to me to make that clear, but he was saying, you know, that I was this and I was that, and I'm like, no. In fact, it was very important to me that there was as much quiet as possible, and that what was communicated was very much in the, of course we spoke, but he was broken. He witnessed. He had not read his father's biography before. I stood with him at the gallows where his father hung, which is 8 yards from the villa. This man approaching probably near the end of his life, I don't know. So he was broken, and all he could do was survive it, really. But his son, my contemporary, who's a very religious man, has a terrible fear of the sins of the fathers revisiting. And I had to really, he was very, very verbal and wanted to cut off from his father and would not refer to his grandfather as his grandfather until day 3. And it wasn't conscious, but he stopped dissociating. And it became mein Vater, and this was a very big moment. And there were many big moments because they had been able to not turn away, but dissociate to a certain extent. So he was completely, words aren't sufficient, but there was a deep, profound gratitude. A deep, profound gratitude. And my wish is that he will have a better death.
Es wurde gefragt, der Sohn von dem Kommandeur war auch das erste Mal in Auschwitz bei diesem Treffen mit Maya, mit der Filmcrew, und wie es ihm ging. Und er war ein gebrochener Mann, er hatte sich vorher nicht speziell mit der Biografie von seinem Vater auseinandergesetzt. Er war ein absolut gebrochener Mann und er war voll mit Schuldgefühlen. Er konnte Maya nicht in die Augen schauen, er saß mit dem Kopf nach unten da. Und Maya sagte, nee, wir müssen uns in die Augen schauen, wir müssen einen Weg finden, um zu kommunizieren. Und zwar nicht nur über die Sprache, sondern auch nonverbal, über das Gesicht, über Mimik, über die Augen. Und es gelang ihr, ihn aus dieser Haltung, aus dieser Reserve rauszulocken und einen Weg zu finden, um miteinander zu kommunizieren.
Anybody else?
I think nobody here can really understand what happened in Auschwitz, only the victims. Was this perhaps the reason for your mother to be silent, not to speak about, because she felt that he could be understood.
Yes, that's certainly a part of it.
Yes.
And I think this is so important because it demands a dignity also. And the idea of speaking about it to those that don't want to hear or don't get it, or, you know, it's too, it's like, and so, not living with, but one of the difficulties being my mum's daughter, and I know this is, I'm not alone in this, is suffering is so extraordinary, and as you say, none of us can imagine it, that I didn't have a hope in hell, literally. And my mother said to me, when I arrived in Birkenau this time, and I spoke with her many times, I said, Mom, I'm feeling, Maya, there is no place for feelings in Auschwitz. And the other very kind thing she said when I was there was, I was standing in the freezing cold waiting for something to happen. And she said, at least you're not going to the gas chambers. Das ist meine Mutti. And what can you say to that?
And I have a second question.
No, ask, because I'd like to hear your question.
First question? Okay.
Yeah, question. Keep the flow.
I think you have seen the place in Auschwitz where Höss has been executed.
Yeah.
What was your feeling to stand there?
To see the children. It was surreal. Because, of course, this was not a place that I've been there before, but that was... I engaged with the physicality of Auschwitz from that perspective, rather than just, not rather than, it's only the other side of the wall, for God's sake. But the proximity, and it, I have an image of him. We have pictures, but we had to decide what we would show you and what we wouldn't show you. But I have images of him. He uses the same walker that many elderly people, that my mother uses. And he was sitting, like, just looking at the gallows. And I obviously saw this, but I saw it on film. And it was really strange because you see me walking around the perimeter, and it was such a powerful image. It was such a powerful image. And he just sat. And then visitors at Auschwitz had no idea who they were looking at the gallows. I mean, so he's not a man of many words, but his eyes, his everything, I felt his agony, you know, and there is very little place for him to move within that, and I have the world to move within, you know, so I was deeply touched by both of them. I can honestly say, you know, deeply touched by both of them. I will meet them again. And I am grateful, very grateful, that I had that opportunity, but that I discovered something about myself that I couldn't, you couldn't know that technically. And that for me is like, wow. So that's who you are, my Lasker-Wallfisch. So and then when my mum said I was here, I was like, yeah. And it was very real, you know, because I've always witnessed my mother. I've always been my mother, or thing. And then, you know, this was something really different. And as you know, my mother's taken the stage many times with other, but this is the first time in history. But I liked them. They didn't do it. Poor bastards. What a history. And they both used religion quite a lot to, you know, try and defend and deflect. But they're not bad people. It's not their fault.
So jetzt
jetzt 2 Fragen als Übersetzung und ja, Fragen haben. Ich hoffe, du kriegst jetzt alles zusammen. Also die erste Frage war, wir können uns ja alle überhaupt nicht vorstellen, was für Leiden in Auschwitz geschehen ist, wie diese Leiden waren, wir kennen es nur aus Erzählungen. Und ob das nicht auch ein Grund war für Mayas Mutter, Anita, Lasker-Wallfisch, drüber zu schweigen. Und sie sagt, ja, auf jeden Fall, das war natürlich auch ein Teil. Man kann dieses Gefühl nicht vermitteln. Es macht sprachlos und das war auch einer der Gründe, warum sie geschwiegen hat. Die zweite Frage war, wie es eben ging, an den Galgen zu stehen, wo ja auch Hess, der Kommandeur, auch später gehängt wurde in Auschwitz. Und Maya erzählte mehr, wie es dem Sohn von ihm ging, von dem Kommandeur, dass er davor stand und ja, gebrochen war und nicht damit umgehen konnte und sich da erst auch wirklich mit der Biografie auseinandergesetzt hat. Und Maya ihn wieder eigentlich bedauert hat im Gefühl, weil ihr die Welt offen steht und er sich mit dieser kleinen Welt, diesem kleinen Ort auseinandersetzen musste.
I tell you what was weird, at Krakow airport, checking in with them, that was really weird. That was really weird. I mean, out of body experience or what? And I was very frightened, don't get me wrong, that night with my mum before the next day, I was shitting myself in the morning, thinking, what have I done? What have I done? And my mother's first words, who would have thought it? The son and commandant of Auschwitz having coffee and kuchen in my house. And it was her house. So guys, any criticisms? Anybody want to say I've done a terrible thing? Anybody think I'm totally nuts? Yeah, go for it.
No criticism, but I'm not Jewish. I'm a German, and I realize in the last years more and more that we have films about Nazi time, movies and everything, and we sometimes I think we are now ready to put the focus on this because there's nobody to blame anymore. So this is very pitiful, but the more we put the focus on remembering the dead, we might make the mistake not to care for the living.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So my question is to you, is very practical. Do you have an advice in a practical way how we could approach that we don't go the one way and forget the other one?
We're doing it now. We're doing it now. And it's not, I'm not leaving it here. You know, you're all doing your own thing. I know here, you're very busy with the crisis that's going on. It's like, don't just pay, it's about paying attention, don't turn away, talk, don't be afraid. You know, it's like, what's the worst that can happen? What can make a difference?
And if I can just add something to that, having done a lot of workshops in Holocaust education with your mother's testimony as well, one of the questions that come up from all of those students is always, so what happened with the family after? What is with the next generation? And then I can always say this, you know, there's your book now to engage with that. But they really want to know how do they feel about it? What is going on with them? Because they also have a transgenerational history that they haven't really acknowledged. And I think that's part of what about Holocaust education sometimes, that we also miss talking about Jewish life in Germany today.
And why people like you and all of us is so important, because of the terrible unconscious bias stroke anti-Semitism that exists here in Germany. I mean, I've been very traumatised the last 2 years by it. I had to run back to England just now for 3 months because I was so disturbed. And everybody thought I was mad because I smell it. You know, I don't speak Judendeutsch, but that is. So it's like stepping out of a comfort zone, and it's about getting your hands dirty. Never be afraid of getting your hands dirty. It's much worse to keep them clean. It's only by crossing over and being uncomfortable, taking a chance, that's for me what it's all about. Asking challenging questions. You know, it's like I'm open to, I'm sure get a lot of negative response to what I've done, but bring it on, you know, at least let's have the conversation, at least I did something. So I don't know if that responds sufficiently to your question, but I believe get involved, do stuff, show up.
Could you put just a little bit more meat to that? Like, what would you like Germans to do in the face of anti-Semitism?
I would like that kind of question to reach as wide an audience as possible, and for those that don't get it, to sit in that uncomfortable place, acknowledge their own shutdown, and really think about it. I reasonably public, obviously partly because of my mum, and I'm a bit of a, you know, easy target, but it is shocking, even in my publishing house, I'm surrounded by it. So what I want, and what I would encourage, and what I want to sort of facilitate in any way I can, is that very question, but with people who actually want to hear the answer. And it means being uncomfortable. It means really being uncomfortable. And also, you know, as I'm sure you know, there's a terrible culture of using Jewish voices inappropriately and being misappropriated. And let's face it, most people don't get what it means. You don't have to be a Jew necessarily to get what it means to be Jewish, but you have to really have got engaged with it. And there's few examples, I'm afraid, that I've encountered to really get the feeling, you know, to really... And Sana is an example of someone who's really been deeply in it. And I'm afraid, you know, the majority aren't. And it's awful. It's so entrenched. I don't know if you've read The Pity of It All. Have you read The Pity of It All? Everybody should read this book. It's about Moses Mendelssohn in the 18th century, when he came through the gate in Brandenburg where the pigs came in, and where it all began. And the expression Judendeutsch came from. And when I read this, I realised that's why they all think I'm fetching. I'm not talking, I'm fetching. And I have to say I've come across this huge amount, and it's very difficult. And sometimes I don't know if I'm going to survive it, and if I've made a terrible mistake. You know, because I was safer in England. Bloody bored, but safer. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Es gab zwei Fragen.
Ja, aber die ineinander übergehen. Gut, es wurde gefragt, es wird viel an die Toten erinnert, gerade eben im Zusammenhang mit Antisemitismus, mit Holocaust. Aber was tun wir für die Lebenden jetzt? Wie gehen wir damit um? Und Maja sagte ganz klar, das ist der Grund, warum wir jetzt heute Abend hier sind. Sie als nächste Generation, wir als jüngere Generation, und genauso damit können wir umgehen. Auch Sanas Forschungsarbeit auch über transgenerationale Geschichte, sorry, ein fürchterliches Wort zum Aussprechen, sich damit beschäftigen, die wissen, was mit der nächsten Generation ist. Aber genauso beachten, wie ist denn das jüdische Leben jetzt in Deutschland, heute in unserer Zeit? Wie gehen wir, oder wie können wir Antisemitismus begegnen? Auch versteckten Antisemitismus.
Unconscious bias. Unconscious bias.
Und das Unbewusste, diese unbewusste Neigung dazu, die unbewusste Aufrechterhalten von Antisemitismus. Und ein Weg dafür ist, unbequeme Fragen zu stellen, nachzubohren, nachzufragen, auch wenn man sich dabei unbeliebt macht, auch wenn es unbequem ist, einfach auf die Wunden hinweisen. Und Maya sagt auch, ja, es wäre für sie viel einfacher in England zu leben, aber langweiliger. Auch das ist mit ein Grund, warum sie hier in Deutschland ist und ins Bewusstsein rufen.
Well, she's going home. Okay, so I think we probably, and I really, can I just say, I don't want you to applaud, okay, this is your haSchoah. So I thank you for your whatever. And yeah.
Sie sagt, sie möchte bitte keinen Applaus hier für ihren Vortrag. Wir haben haSchoah und es passt für sie nicht. Aber sie möchte danken allen Anwesenden, allen, die hier da waren, die zugehört haben. Ja, vielen Dank.
Und jetzt noch die Musik.
No, can we have 1 minute silence?
Eine Minute bitte schweigen noch und dann die Musik.
And can I suggest, I don't know if anybody wants that thing over there, that they might like to come over to me because I'm really tired and need to leave because I've been here on the road for 12 hours. If anybody wants that over there, perhaps whilst the last bit of music's happening, if you want me to do anything with it, you might like to come up. That's no pressure. I'm just saying, because I'm not going to hang around for a long time. Okay, but thank you. There's no pressure. You probably bought it last time.
Wer noch ein Buch von ihr signiert haben möchte, da hinten liegen Bücher. Maya wird nicht mehr lange hier sein. Sie ist sehr, sehr müde nach dem langen Tag. Wenn, dann muss es dann also gleich geschehen.
Wunderbar gesungen. Das war keine wunderbar gesungen. Wunderbare Frauenstimme. Ja. Dankeschön.
Für das nächste Stück bräuchte ich dann wieder mein Mikrofon.
Ist das Mikrofon?
Ja, es ist
Rot.
Ist an. Ist nicht an, Entschuldigung.
And nothing will drag you turn all those good hearts away.